Good morning, everybody. I trust this is going out live because there's not a lot of feedback that I'm getting on my screen, but let's keep our fingers crossed and hope everything's going out well. So good morning and welcome to the joint Skyresponse and IoT-Comms webinar. And I think I'd like to start by introducing you to today's guests. So from IoT-Comms, we have Gunnar, who's the company's CEO. And from Skyresponse, we have Anders, who heads up business development. And has got a little bit of a sore throat today due to a cold, or man flu perhaps. So please bear with him if he's a bit chesty. And we don't have a lot of time this morning, so this is a really short webinar. But we may have an opportunity to slightly overrun on the Q&A, perhaps sort of 10, 15 minutes. So please bear that in mind. Particularly should there be some important questions that were unanswered. I'd always also encourage people to use the chat facility. It's going to be difficult to take all the questions in real time, but I'll try and pick out questions that are pertinent and are quite important. And we can also do a follow-up to those questions if we don't have time to answer them today. So by way of a background, and I'm sure most attendees are aware of the strength of this Swedish tech sector, with some of Europe's leading companies based there. They'll also, however, have the advantage of being an early adopter of IP-based phone networks, and as such have a decade of experience, which we have an opportunity to call upon. I think it was way back in 2009 from memory that Swedish network providers started moving to digital. And it's really important to tap into that experience, both good, what went well, and perhaps the bad, what didn't go so well. So whilst I would encourage you to ask questions, as I said, via the chat facilities, I'd like to start straight off by asking Gunnar, why are two Swedish organizations, both offering cloud-based services, having a webinar specifically for the UK market?
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and hello, everyone. So I'm from IoT-Comms, and what we do is that we provide a cloud platform for voice, video, and alarm communication. And as you say, Steve, why are we doing this together? Well, we do it because we have a lot of knowledge to share. We have started early in the cloud. Actually, if you go back to the 90s, the government made it possible for people living in Sweden to tax deduct the lease of PCs and internet connections, which means that everybody had PC and everybody were connected to internet. So that also led us into being early adopters into the cloud. And not only co-location cloud, but also moving into cloud native application where we are building software in public clouds such as AWS and so. Second to that, this also were driving the demands of the telecom networks. So I would say we have been living in the world where everything was analog. We are now living in the world where everything is digital, but in between, and I think this is where most of the customers are in the UK as well, there is a mix of analog and digital networks. So we have tons of experiences in this field. Together with Skyresponse, which was one of our early customers, we have delivered Skype to them since 2018, and Skype is actually, you know, kind of invented in Sweden. So I think we have a lot of things that we can share and learning, so to say, that would benefit to the attendees.
No, absolutely. Not least the offices are only about 3 or 4 miles apart in Stockholm, aren't they? Yeah. Anders, and from your perspective?
Well, basically, so good morning, everyone. My name is Anders, and I'm the head of sales at Skyresponse. And just like Gunnar mentioned, when the digitalization started in the Nordics, we who came from telecommunications saw that there is a huge need to provide new kind of services to manage and handle alarms, basically. So our founder, Martin Reidevall, and the one that's been around for a long time, really understood that there is a huge gap on the market here to be able to provide services and platform to actually manage the alarms. So we started out with personal security back then, and very quickly transformed or added the care sector, because there was a huge need to be able to manage the the ARC services, the nursing homes, and all those kinds of digitalization going on, and to be able to provide a alarm management platform around that, basically.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Staying with yourself, if I may, Anders, what is alarm management versus alarm communication?
Well, from our end, or very simplified, I would say that it's basically to be able to receive, react, and route any type of alarms. And by digging into that a little bit, I would say that it's also basically to be able to make sure that we receive the right type of alarm and send it to the right type of person in the right time, basically. And that can be anywhere from going to the predictive side or to the after management, or looking into behaviors and data and all that. So for us, it's very much making sure that we receive and route and send the alarms to the right type of platform, person, individual, or service.
Okay, thank you. And Gunnar, from your perspective on that question?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, alarm management and alarm communication have been very tightly integrated, and what we see is this being decoupled. And you can say alarm communication is about getting the alarm from one side to the other side and set up the relevant communication. But that is today, and where we see this is heading, that and we see it in Scandinavia, that a scenario where an elderly person is falling, there is an alarm being triggered. Maybe that alarm doesn't go to an alarm receiving center, maybe go to a healthcare worker. And that healthcare worker would like to access a video stream from a camera into that person's home, and then you would like to do transcription of the calls. So, you know, I think we are up for a big change in what is alarm communication here, and to do this, a modern VoIP backend is crucial, because if you think it's complex today, I mean, I can guarantee that it will be more complex going forward, but it will be in the digital world. So.
Yeah, and I guess you just touched upon something there, Gunnar, in terms of video transmission. And just to very quickly touch on that, because when I speak to UK commissioners and talk about streaming a video of the elderly, sort of, you can feel the hairs going up on people's necks.
Yeah.
And yet, that's a transition Sweden's actually gone through and come out the other end, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, it's still not so that it's 100% usage, but it's definitely happening, and you have customers that have that, and you do surveillance of elderly people and so on. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Moving to you, Anders, what is a cloud-based service, and how is it different from the installations that we have today? And if I may just add on to that, a question from myself, which is, I keep hearing about fully based cloud applications and co-located equipment in the cloud. Perhaps the pair of you can touch upon that. But if I may start with yourself, Anders.
Of course. So basically, difference between an on-prem solution having servers and hardware, etc., in a data center, compared to a cloud-based or a native cloud-based solution, is that basically, instead of having your own equipment, you buy it from someone else who has it in the cloud. And what that means is that we, as a company, or anyone as a company, can use the infrastructure as a service from the large public cloud companies such as AWS or Microsoft Azure, or wherever it might be. And they provide tons of different services that we can use when we build our solutions. So they provide the capacity and the scalability and the redundancy on all those kinds of services that is needed for resilience and reliability. But they also have microservices that we use in terms to be able to build our services. So we don't need to build everything from scratch. So they have tons of stuff that we can use as a part of our development that will basically make the cloud solution constantly developing, and also adding a very powerful foundation that we use, basically. So that is the main difference if we look on the cloud native versus, like you might have heard, the co-location or private cloud. So if you have co-location or private cloud, it's still the hardware and services, but it might be placed in a different data center or co-location. So scalability-wise and the use of resources in a co-located environment versus a cloud native is a very big difference, because in a cloud native there is basically endless capabilities. I mean, figuring AWS or Azure, the amount of the hardware and resources they have in their data centers is almost endless. And if you look on a private cloud, it's basically still the local service and hardware, but the experience for you as a user is a cloud service. But there is still a server or a hard drive or memory that needs to take different kind of resources in account when you do the services, basically. So that is the main thing.
Yeah, just a quick clarification as well. I know Skyresponse are keen on API connecting to other software applications to make life easy, for an operator, for the control center management team. I presume if you're in the cloud, as in full cloud, native cloud with Amazon, let's say, and there is a provider of an accounting system or a service management system that a client wants to use, which is also cloud-based in that native environment. Presumably that makes it much easier to link the two systems together, does it? Or does it not make any difference?
Yeah, of course it does. I mean, to be honest, it's basically software development, regardless of what kind of tools we are using or platform we are using. But with using the standards for APIs makes it a lot easier to make two different platforms to communicate with each other, because they have basically a common foundation on how things are being put together and what kind of fields, etc., that should be actually talking to each other and so on. So yes, that makes it a bit more in a standard way to do things, which of course makes it a lot easier, especially if you have, like many of the service providers have out there, a lot of different kind of solutions that they want to put together and make sure that they communicate. You want to maybe send data from an alarm receiving center and receive it in a, like you said, a field service management platform, or maybe it's an electronic health record or whatever it might be. So having open APIs to be able to build those integration makes life a lot easier.
Okay, that's really good. Thank you, Anders. And Gunnar, from IoTcom's perspective, how do you leverage the benefits of that native cloud?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things. So the cloud evolution goes in different steps. One of the steps being co-location, and you move your servers to the cloud. And I think at that point, when you're there, what we see is that companies then still have kind of a monolithic software structure. And that structure means that you do releases like every 3 months, every 6 months. When you have a new feature, you need to test it, and you need to test the entire system and so on. And when you move then into a full cloud, if you call it like that, or a serverless cloud, or a microservices cloud, or whatever, I mean, then all these building blocks, it's almost like Lego bricks. They are loosely coupled together. So when you release a new feature, or you do an update, or you do something, I mean, you only do that on that particular Lego brick. And then, of course, you have testing frameworks around it. But I mean, the benefits that you get with this is that the ability to do release of features and updates, I mean, we do it every day, and we don't need to test through, and we don't have a cycle of release every 3 months and so on. You have an unlimited scale because we build serverless, which means that we can deploy small customer and we can build large customer. You only add more compute capacity. From a customer perspective, it's like you pay for what you use. I think today many of the existing applications, I mean, you buy, it's like almost like an old PBX, you have 500 features, you need to buy access to them all. But I mean, today you only pay for what you use and so on. But I think the operation cost, you have it as a managed service, all these things is a great benefit from doing it in a cloud native application.
The next question sort of really leads on, and to some degree you may have already answered it, Gunnar, so we could stick with yourself. Why should alarm services be bought as a cloud service? And I guess the supplementary question from myself is, and I know speaking to commissioners, there's a huge concern about security of data, and of course the importance in the public sector, particularly of protecting data. So, you know, why should alarm services be bought, and how secure is the data that has been stored?
Yes, I think it touches upon the previous question. I mean, pay for what you use. You have a rapid time to market. You have no country dependencies. You know, telco is normally very country dependent, but now when you're building on the internet, I mean, a company can launch a service anywhere in the world very efficiently. Since it's a managed service, you don't need to have all the resources for development, for running the servers and so on. So there's tons of these type of benefits that you have. And when it comes to security, I think I saw a study a few years ago that were saying basically that it was a recommendation, and I think this is valid also here, that if you look at many of the systems that are out there in the care space that have been living there for like 20, 30 years, I bet that most of them have an administration password that is 4 digits, and that's it. So you can say that the vulnerability of that is quite high. And today what we talk about is, number one, of course, all our services are GDPR compliant, both from us and from Skyresponse. We are running encryption of voice and data. All media are encrypted. We are authenticating devices by different methodologies. We have multi-factor authentication for those logging in. The design, which is a security by design, and you only have access to the parts that you need to have access to. So I mean, there are so many things today, and the encryption keys are, you know, it's really advanced methodologies. So I think that from that perspective, and also the hardware, we know that all the public clouds hardware is running, and it's continuously monitored by whether it's AWS, Azure, and so on. So I think in many perspective, it is I was going to say a better place to be, but I think it's more secure, both from an operation perspective, but also in terms of encryption and authentication and so on.
I've come across the term multi-tenanted a number of times with commissioners, etc. Could you, just as a bit of a jargon buster, explain in very layman's language what multi-tenanted truly means, Gunnar?
Yeah, I mean, basically it is that many customers can use the same platforms also in different layers, if you like, where you can have domains, subdomains, but it is the same platform, but it's different customers having access, and they only have access to their own servers, not their own service, their own services.
Yes.
So, but it's basically you know, many customers having access to the same platform, and they can use the services independent of the others.
So it's a bit, I'm trying to think of a good example. They're really like vertical towers. So one customer within that single platform can see its own data, but it has absolutely no access or ability to see another customer's data. And presumably that's pretty much unlimited, is it?
Yeah, correct.
You can also just add into that. So basically what you do with the multi-tenant solution is that we, for example, or many others providing software as a service solutions, we basically share the same kind of software, meaning that when you use a multi-tenant solution and services being developed by a software or a SaaS company like us or anyone else. When we do releases and add new features and stuff like that, they are available for everyone. And you will basically have a continuous developed solution where you will benefit from everything that happens. So things will evolve over time. And I think that reflects a little bit on what we see and have seen for a time. So there's a saying in I want what I want and I want it now, basically, which is the demand generation. And that reflects very much on the services we also need to provide for our users, basically, because the market requirements when we move to digital and everything changing it's so quick, so it's always running ahead. And using a multi-tenant software used by many type of ARCs or whatever it might be, nursing home providers, etc., will actually benefit from having a SaaS solution on continuously developing, adding new type of features going on and on, basically. So I would say that is also one of the main things with multi-tenancy, that you will benefit from the software that everyone is using within that service, basically.
Okay. And staying with yourself, Anders, why would a cloud solution in many cases be safer than a premise or an on-site solution?
But Gunnar already touched on it. I mean, for example, when you're using a cloud native solution on a public cloud service provider, such as AWS or Azure or whatever it might be, I mean, the resources they put in to put on the perimeter and all the cybersecurity and all the IT security that they need to have in order to be able to protect from cyber attacks and ransomware and all those. I mean, the amount of money and resources they spend just to be on a very high level of protection you can't really compete with that doing it privately. I would say that it's impossible because they have endless resources in that sense. So that is one very, very good reason on why you actually should use those type of services. Then, of course, like Gunnar mentioned, and also from a Skyresponse perspective, we add a lot of IT security on top of that, on the service we build on the Amazon platform. So that is one very strong reason. And I mean, looking into the redundancy, the geographical separations they provide in the data centers, the network resilience to be able to access those services and so on. They're all over the world. So the chance of being both attacked in a way where Amazon goes down is basically impossible. Then again, those developing services on it, such as Skyresponse, and also need to have security and protection and do a lot of cybersecurity risk assessment and so on to provide to protect the software we provide. But I mean, that is many of the main reasons on why we use the cloud services, because it's just so strong in its foundation. So compare it to putting in a server in a co-location, you will still need to make sure that you have all the protection and work with all those services in the core of the infrastructure. So yeah, that is one of the main reasons when we talk to the IT security and resilience and stuff like that.
A lot of the attendees today, a number will be running traditional analog call centers, and in the UK we tend to have the model of a manned call receiving center, albeit some remote staffing these days. But in the event of a DR, because of the premise-based equipment, you typically have another physical site, maybe it's a mile or two away, quite often sort of in a sheltered housing scheme, with maybe a stripped down version of a call center, 2 or 3 operator terminals, and a duplicate set of equipment. And traditionally, you'd swing the analog telephone lines to the second call center, and then continue to operate physically from that location. I'll ask you both, but again, sticking with yourself for the time being, Anders, how does DR work in a cloud-based application when you don't have that physical hardware on site?
Basically, it works pretty much in the same way. but it's just that the power of a public cloud and their geographical redundancy and having data centers all over the world. So in theory, it's the same kind of thing. They have different data centers. They have independent internet connection. They have independent power supplies, failovers, redundancies, etc., etc. But the experience on our end from a software built on the AVS is that we won't even notice if a internet connection would go down into Amazon. They basically just shift it and we won't notice. So there is the continuous delivery is always there because they have all the failovers. So we don't really see or understand, okay, now there might be one of their internet connections that went down, but we don't know. We don't even get notified about it because they just change it and route it from a different direction. So the redundancy that they have in the core is basically on sites and places all over the world with communications on several touch points everywhere, basically.
Okay, if you could pick up on that as well, Gunnar, but again, a bit of a supplementary question from myself. If everything is in the cloud, then I guess what's really important is being able to get to it. So suddenly the redundancy becomes not necessarily having multiple sets of equipment on site.
Yep.
Redundancy, I guess, is how can I always get
Yep.
to the cloud, and perhaps not putting all your eggs in one basket and having effectively one broadband connection between you as an operator in a call center and the cloud.
Yeah, no, I think that is spot on, Steve. I mean, we are living on internet, and I think just coming from the telco world and realize that you are now living on internet and you are building on internet. I mean, there are a lot of benefits, and as I said, one of these being these country boundaries. You can scale anywhere, and as Anders said. All the AWS centers are running on 3 different physical locations. You can have backup into other regions. So, I mean, there are multi of these opportunities, but you also need to get access to the internet. So our services are dependent on internet. So it might be that you have redundancy questions more on that level. Then it is also possible to build autonomous systems where you actually can, you kind of can download a container from AWS and you can place this on a server physically where you're actually located and have the services run only from that instance as well. So it is possible to live in both a hybrid deployment, but also in a fully cloud deployment. And on our side, we have a lot of governmental customers and so on, and there we can handle personal data locally in local data centers and run the service separately on local data centers. So, it's a tricky question to answer. I would say the possibilities are there, but you need to do some architectural work to get it the right way. So
yeah, so perhaps looking at multiple paths. I know when I ran a call center in Eastbourne, we had 2 separate fiber connections coming into the building, and then a belt and braces high capacity radio link direct to a data center. So we thought three points of contact. Hopefully, we'll have a situation where at least one of those will always be up. But you're obviously doing a lot of networking, Gunnar. I'd be very surprised if people on this call hadn't come across you or come across your name. And I know the pair of you are going to be very much at the ITech conference in a couple of days' time. But based on that knowledge, Gunnar, and based upon the sort of the conversations you've had, what would you say characterizes customers and their situations in the UK at the moment, and what might their concerns be?
I think that obviously, given that BT is shutting down the analog network, I think a lot of the people out there are trying to figure out, number one, will it actually close? But more to that, how do we mitigate that situation in short time, so to say? But what I think is maybe another question that needs to be asked is more like, okay, all these devices coming in. I mean, you have fire alarms, and you have door access, and you have fall detection radars. You will have Google coming in. You will have Amazon coming in. You will have all this. So you will end up in a situation where this protocol fragmentation is just going to explode because of more devices coming in. So I think most in the UK today try to figure out the first step of this, but I think that you need to kind of lift your horizon and start to think about, okay, what is it that I need in my backend in order to handle all this new type of devices coming in, and I think you will get into this VoIP backend, multiple protocols. You need to be able to live in that world, I think. But immediately now is get a solution that helped me to bridge into the digital world.
As a professional in this sector, and a telecommunications professional, Gunnar, I don't know whether you got any more of an inside view in what's happening in the UK with Openreach as one of the largest providers of physical networks in the UK.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's more than one or two attendees on this call who are sort of hoping quietly that this problem will go away, and that the bit like in the UK, we're going to switch off FM radio in favor of DAB radio, and sort of 5-10 years later, or whatever it is, we still have FM radio as well. Are we likely to still be using analog systems in 5 or 10 years' time, or is the imperative we have to move to IP in the UK?
I mean, I was 10 years back, I was working at Telia, which is a Swedish PTT. And I were part of actually taking the decision to shut down ISDN. So I mean, that was the easy part, and then you had to make it done. And I think a learning from that is that in the world of an operator, why do they do it? Well, one is that nobody's using the technology so much, and the number of subscribers on the technology is going down. But eventually, they will get into a question of cost. How do we save money? And following the debate in UK that, well, there will be a guarantee that certain organization can continue to run and so on. I don't think that will happen, because the only way to save cost for an operator is to get the station to be shut down. You take out all the hardware, you pulled out the power plug, because the power is a huge part of the cost. Maybe even you sell the telecom building, get rid of that. Then you are, as an operator, saving costs. So I'm quite confident that in the world we are living, where everybody's chasing cost and so on, there will not be any prolongation. It will be about shutting down the hardware, shutting down the station, sell the station, then BT or Openreach or whatever that structure is will earn their money.
Yeah, so to paraphrase you, Gunnar, because I know the telecom providers, the CPs, have said, you know, where somebody has a telecare service, we will work around them for a period of time. But I think the way I read that is great. We can push the upgrade of those people with telecare devices to the back of the program. But as you say, ultimately, you can't keep an exchange, a BT exchange, to use that old-fashioned term, running in a town or a village, supporting a few dozen people on telecare devices when it's costing £100,000 a year to run. So whilst the program is flexible up to, I guess, the 31st of December 2025, that cut-off date is still there. And certainly in communications I've had with Openreach, who are not exclusive, but represent the majority of the CPE connections in domestic properties in the UK, their view is we'll be flexible, but that end date hasn't actually changed. So that's something I think really for everybody to take on board. Yeah. Just to pause here, because we're sort of over half an hour into 3/4 of an hour call. Please feel free to raise questions. Don't worry about how daft a question it may seem. However daft it is, I'm sure we've been asked worse questions. And sometimes what you might consider to be a daft question is actually the most important one to get clarification and knowledge out there. But Anders, we've left you alone for a little while, so if we may come back to you. How can digitalization and xCloud SaaS platforms change the way we're working in care services? And I've got a specific question there, which is I'm aware the Skyresponse platform does two things. It allows calls to be taken and act as an alarm receiving platform, but it also allows the linking of dispersed alarm units in sheltered housing and nursing homes to provide that same functionality via an app. So perhaps you can touch upon that as well.
I mean, I would say, as we all know, the care delivery services we deliver onto the market is in a huge need of change. And we see that all over in the Nordics, UK, Europe, etc., that the cost for providing services as we have been doing for a long time will basically not be possible going forward. I mean, I think we have a couple of municipalities here in Sweden, for example, that they will file for bankruptcy if they were needed to provide care services as they have been doing in the same way for the elderly population growing in Sweden, for example. So there is a huge need and change. And what happens when we go digital is that we are being able to provide so many more type of services, like Gunnar touched upon earlier, in terms of we have different kind of telecare equipment. We have cameras, we have surveillance, we have all these things. And the reason for it, it's not just because it's new technology. There is a need. We can't really continue, for example, to do night checks driving around in a car in Sweden to, I don't know, 50 individuals living at home. We need to be more efficient in the way we provide services. So that is the main driver, I would say, when we go to the digitalization and what's been going on in the Nordic for a long time now. The demand for providing care services to elderly is, of course, increasing very much all over the world. So how do we do it, and how do we transform the way we actually provide those services? And I think that is a little bit of the key. When we talk about analog to digital, we very much talk about one-to-one switch, but that is not really what's going on here. It's the first thing we need to do. We need to make sure that everything works. But in the long run, we need to change the services we actually deliver to the service users. So I think going to a, it doesn't have to be a SaaS platform or anything like that, but going digital, and what that actually drives is that we can change the way we work and provide services. And that is everything from the service user to the field service management team, or to a nurse on site. So we need to be able to remove all the inefficient stuff. We need to think about environment. We need to understand how we can create a better quality of life for the actual service user, etc., etc. So that is the overall benefits with the digitalization. Like everything else in our society, everything that has gone digital, we all started with, oh, it's just a temporary solution, but everything is moving that way in everything we do. Compared it to the music industry, when we needed to do the piracy and stuff, and then suddenly we had streaming services. So the market demands the change, basically, and that reflects very much on what the digitalization will do in the telecare services as well.
I'm very aware of the Norwegian government's approach to sharing data, and I think they're miles ahead, quite bluntly, of where we are in the UK. And I'm aware that in Norway, you know, an operator within a call center gets a call from Steve Smith, but a care record and a health record can pop up in the database, in the screen, and show, you know, medication, you know, last visit hospital, and that's hugely powerful. I think we'd all appreciate that if you're running a control center and you're talking to Mr. Smith and he's complaining of chest pains, but you can see he had a bypass operation a couple of weeks ago, mentally the operator is going to handle that call perhaps in a different way than would otherwise be the case. Can you just touch upon that fairly briefly about some of that integration and how patient records have been able to be brought into the telecare sector in Norway?
Yeah. First of all, mainly to the digitalization that happens. So we have platforms and systems and different electronic health records and so on that can communicate with each other. What Norway is doing, which is spectacular and also very, very interesting, that they have also changed the way on who owns the data. So there is, for example, in Sweden, we have the municipalities doing the nursing home services, and then we have regional doing hospitals, etc., etc., and they don't really communicate with each other. So if someone is in a nursing home, is being transferred to the hospital, they won't automatically have the health records. In Norway, they turned that around and said it's the actual individual. The service user owns the data and decides if they want to share it, meaning that anyone who provides care services in any way will be able to have access to the person's individual data if they had agreed on sharing it. And what that creates in looking into how we do it together with Norway is basically that they have a national solution where everyone can join in. It's called like the welfare technology hub, let's call it like that. So from us, when we're handling alarms, or when a Norwegian partner handling alarms, they can request health information together with the alarm. So what that creates is, of course, for the operator or the respondent or the resource out on the field, they will have much more accurate data, know what kind of decision they will make. And that is purely due to the digitalization, because we can receive so much more data. The communication from all the kind of transmitters and platforms will enhance the information we have. And then, of course, it's a question of compliance and GDPR and so on. But that is also sorted in a way: who stores the data, who has access to the data, permission-based, role-based, and so on and so on. So it's a huge benefit for an operator, for example, looking into alarms and really get to have all the information they need to know in order to be able to address the alarm when it comes in the right direction or way.
Okay, thank you for that. I think, judging by the timing, we're at 43 minutes. A couple of minutes with yourself, Gunnar, perhaps to finish off. And a general question here. What do you see as the critical challenge and risks associated with the analog to digital transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know that the most critical part of this is that you have a rate of 0% of successful alarm calls. But it might also be that you have 100% rate of successful alarm calls. And I think that is spot on what is the challenge, that you don't really know what it is before we actually are there. And everybody need to take action on that. I think, again, coming back to this, that if you look at the world like 20 years ago, when everything was analog, you have analog devices, you have analog networks, and you have some sort of analog or legacy alarm receiving platforms. And then you are moving towards digital, but on this journey where you are now, well, you both have analog, but you also have digital devices. The network is analog, but it's also digital, and it is routed and bypassing many other networks at the same time. And then the alarm receiving center is either analog or digital. So there's a huge bunch of ifs and buts that you don't know. And I think that what we have been saying is that, I mean, first of all, our alarm receiver that we have built it today, and we have built it in software. And the reason for having it in software and independent of other things is that we can actually compensate for challenges in the environment or the networks that you have there. So if there's an echo on the line and we receive too many alarm digits, we can actually in software, cloud native, we can say, well, the first digit, let's scrap that digit. So then suddenly we are successful on the following digits and so on, and we can receive the alarm. So I think that is a key area that you need to look at the successful rate of alarms, and how can you stay on top of that, and how can you ensure that you are as close to 100, if not 100%. How can you be as close to that as possible? And second to that, I think another critical issue, and I see there have been some questions on it as well with regards to power failure and so on. And I think that specifically in group livings and so on, I mean, there are opportunities to actually have extra power supplies and so on that will be added to your solution. So there are a couple of these things that I think are very critical to look at in detail. And we have tons of experience, and for those of you being at ITEC, it would be great to have a more in detail chat on it. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, just in my own experience, speaking to OpenReach and applying, I guess, a little bit of common sense. There are roughly, I understand, and by all means, shoot me down, there are about 650 communication providers in the UK. Everybody knows Virgin and British Telecom, etc. But it's quite a long list, 650, and some of them just on a regional basis. If you consider all of the different types of alarm equipment out in the field, analog equipment, you then consider the different protocols those systems are communicating, traditionally using DTMF. You have then that 650 potential communication providers. And at the other end, you've got multiple providers of call center, again, operating different protocols, some with SIP trunks, some with ISDN, some with analog connections. If you put those variables together, I think I worked out there's about 70,000 permutations. And I know for feedback, success rate of transiting a traditional analog device into a call center successfully varies between almost 100% in a perfect scenario to 0%. In other words, with a certain combination of CP equipment, call center, then it doesn't work at all. So.
And that's to your earlier question, Steve, on cloud services and being able to build cloud native with these Lego bricks, is that if you are having a monolith, you will never be able to compensate for that. But if you are building in the cloud, you're building on software, you can actually, by code, compensate for a lot of these problems that will occur. And from that perspective, you have a better chance of getting a higher rate of successful calls. So.
Yeah, a couple of questions I may pick up on. One from Jerry at UK Telehealthcare. And Jerry is making a very interesting and important point that we're not just seeing the analog to digital transition in the UK, we're actually seeing the sunset of certain mobile technologies. And I'm aware, speaking to some customer groups, that they've bought devices in the past thinking that they're getting around the analog problem, but utilizing a 3G device. I know it's not necessarily in your expertise, Gunnar, mobile data, and perhaps yourself, Anders, but is there any observations that you can share from your Swedish experience on this sunsetting of 3G?
I think that if you look at it in Europe as a whole, 2G and 3G is being shut down. And actually what we see in many cases is that 3G is being shut down before 2G is being shut down. And the reason is that 2G can cover many more devices and so on. And IoT devices will be able to connect into the 2G network. But if you go to other industries, look at elevators, the elevator market in Europe, they are looking at 2G and 3G being shut down. How do we do it? Well, we need to move to SIP and we need to move to VoIP technology. So I would say that it's more a question on how rapidly do you close it? What we have seen is that, again, 2G tend to stay a little bit longer, and that is kind of the fallback solution. But 3G, I think, is being rapidly. I don't even know if it is available in Sweden, to be honest. I need to look that up. But yeah, eventually 4G and 5G, VoIP, SIP technology, that will be the thing. So.
Okay, thank you, Gunnar. Anders, we've got a couple of interesting questions from Louise Reynolds. The first one, Louise has said her company has unfortunately been the victim of a cyber attack. Does a native cloud service offer increased protection from cyber attacks versus traditional server models?
From an infrastructure perspective, yes. So when you buy an infrastructure as a service solution like AWS and so on, they have tons of parameters and IT security policies and softwares for threat detection and intrusion prevention. They have all of those things for the access into their actual infrastructure. So yes, I would say that they are the most protected one, the public clouds. Then, of course, the software built upon their services, for example, IoT Comms or Skyresponse, we also need to have those kind of solution and protections installed on our software. Because when it comes to cybersecurity, it's never better than the weakest link, and that will follow everywhere. So it's not really related only to the actual server or the actual switch or router. So it's everywhere, from how the code is built in the software, how do we prevent malwares, etc., etc. So yes, I would say as a foundation, when you use the public cloud service providers, you will have a much more robust foundation, but still on the servers or services that you used upon them, software developed or whatever it might be, also need to have that kind of protection. I would say that a big difference when we look into the cloud service providers or software providers like us in cloud is that it's a part of our strategy, it's a part of our core to always stay compliant on an IT security relationship in that sense. So we have a lot of policies around it. We do pen tests, we do security risk assessments on a regular basis, testing it, having external consultancy firms trying to penetrate our software, etc., etc. So it needs to be a part of the strategy, regardless if you use Amazon or a co-located solution. IT security is something, or cybersecurity in general, is an area with internet that needs to be on top on everyone's agenda, basically. But in the foundation, I would say that you are very well protected. But again, if you use a software on the services that isn't protected, there is always a risk.
Okay, thank you for that. And the very last question, again from Louise, and I'll aim it at you, Gunnar. And it's really outside of telecare expertise, but it's a generic. Can we learn anything from the Nordics or Europe wide about power resilience, e.g., resilience against national power outages? So, it's great having all this telecommunications equipment in place, and whether I'm not sure whether you're pointing this at one area I'm thinking of, Louise, but of course, one of the things that is different from an analog service in a domestic property, once you move to the Internet of Things and an IP-based router, is your good old-fashioned telephone line, which in the UK analog world has always worked, no matter how resilient power has been. But of course, in the world of IP, if your power in your domestic home goes down, typically your broadband connection is going to fail straight away as well. So any thoughts and reflections on Swedish experience on both those areas?
There's probably another webinar on that topic, I believe, and it's not my area of expertise. But I think that again, coming back to that, in like group livings, I think it's a little bit easier to handle because whilst you are moving the communication from the BT analog cords into onto the digital network, so to say. It's fairly easy, and it's economy of scale to add another power backup related to that. I think it's probably different in home users and dispersed alarms, where this is a little bit more spread out, if you like. So I don't have any super clever answer from that perspective, but in group livings, I think it's easier to handle. So
Yeah, it's interesting.
I just add very short to that one, Steve.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
one thing when it comes to digital that might be very beneficial in that sense is also, since the devices used out there, if you just look on telecare equipment, dispersed alarm units or whatever it may be, with the digital communication, and this is nothing new, but we have the possibility to continuously check the connectivity between the, for example, alarm receiving center device. And we will also instantly know if there has been power failure. If a individual unit has lost some sort of connection, we will. And that is also a way to be able to act upon it without any surprises. So we will know, okay, we can't communicate, or someone has pulled the plug, or the battery is getting low, etc., etc. So that is also one of the enhancements with all the digital communication. We can receive more data basically and understand much more on how the individual unit behaves.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, Anders, that with an IP device, you can keep pinging it. In other words, from a central router, keep asking the field device, are you there? Are you okay? And get a simple yes back. And if you don't get a yes, you'll probably ask that in real terms 3 or 4 times over maybe a 1-3 minute period, and then say, we've lost communication with this device, raise it as a problem to the call center operator. Whereas, of course, with an analog telephone, traditional dial-up telephone, there isn't a physical connection permanent connection between the call center and the alarm dialing equipment. And therefore, the only time you know when a field piece of equipment isn't working in the analog world is when you raise a call and nothing happens. And of course, that is often too late. What I would say is, we're in this crazy position, and I've petitioned the CPs over about a 7 or 8 year period now to say what we can't really have is an individual alarm unit which might have a 24-hour battery backup, a call center which will have battery backup and possibly a generator to run for more than 24 hours. And yet when we move to the digital world, we have a digital connection, and that's got 0 battery backup. And at one point, I understood from OpenReach that there's going to be a 1-hour battery backup requirement on the router. But personally, having recently had my system upgraded at home, there isn't any battery backup. So I have actually good old-fashioned Amazon, and as I say, goes, other suppliers are available. But I've bought a little UPS designed specifically to back up routers for about 6 or 7 hours, which means that the mains fails at home, at least myself or my family can actually continue to make a telephone call. So it's something I would really commend that commissioners look at when they're putting a digital device into a digital upgraded service, that they ensure there's some form of battery backup on the router. Otherwise, as soon as the mains fails, the alarm will still work, the call center will still work, but they won't be able to communicate because the bit in the middle doesn't work.
There are solutions around that, of course, as well, to have local alarm handling, etc., due to power outage and so on. So there are many ways you can build those kind of, like, okay, we need to have a closed alarm loop while the power is off to be able to handle the alarms in a nursing home, for example. Once the power is back up with the internet connectivity, things will be sent to the platform once they have connection, etc., etc. But I mean, then again, that is a challenge, and of course, looking into power outages for the public clouds, of course, they have all these things on their end. But I mean, you are dependent on the internet, so failover for 4Gs and all those kind of things, or maybe have Ethernet or Wi-Fi, etc., etc. it becomes more of a requirement, I would say, to be able to run the services all the time.
Okay, I'm conscious we're out of time. It's bang on 10 o'clock. I said we could go 15 minutes beyond. I just want to finish by thanking you, Gunnar, and thanking yourself, Anders, for giving a little bit of a Swedish perspective on what's happening in telecare. I think the idea is we will have other webinars. We'll expand upon some of these subject areas. So thank you, guys. Most importantly, I'd like to thank the audience for attending. Hopefully, if you've just learned one little thing out of this, then it's been worthwhile attending. Thank you particularly to the 60 odd of you that have stuck it all the way through for the last hour. So thank you for attending. And for those that are attending the conference, the TSA conference in Birmingham, if you see me, or if you see Gunnar or Anders, both Anders and Gunnar have stands at the conference. I'll be wandering around, so please just grab us and say hello. So I look forward to seeing you then. So thank you for attending. Thank you now. Bye.